Good afternoon, everybody. We've got a really good turnout today again, 99 registrations and counting. I'm going to kick off on time. We've got lots to get through. We've got three excellent speakers, and Del Camsell, our senior technical consultant, will be moderating. I'm Joanna Oliver. I look after our international trade programme and also public affairs and conferences and webinars. Just a quick run through of the rules of the CEA House. Like all our events, this webinar is held in accordance with the CEA corporate compliance rules, and you can find a copy of those on our website. The webinar will be recorded and it will be made available with the slides on the CEA website as soon as we've got the recording from Zoom, which takes a while to convert into a YouTube video. Please, I know some of you are struggling a bit with bandwidth, so please, unless you are called upon, turn your video off, and also please stay on mute. I'm sure lots of you are having your lunch, but we probably don't need to share it with you. If you'd like to ask a question, questions will be taken at the end of all the presentations. So when we've heard from all three speakers, please do put your question in the chat box, which is at the bottom of the screen on your Zoom if you're not used to it. I can't believe anybody's not used to Zoom now. And we're doing our best with Zoom. Like all technology, sometimes there's a few glitches. So please don't complain if you or we have any technical difficulties. We're trying our very hardest. So today's para, which I think is about the 9th or 10th that we've run, driving the electric revolution. There's a lot more to it than that. We've got some excellent speakers: Simon Buckley from the Knowledge Transfer Network, Chloe Nemo, Committee on Climate Change, and Mark Urbanowski on driving the electric revolution from Innovate UK. So I'm now going to hand over to Del Camsell, our senior technical consultant, who is far better qualified to handle this than I am. So over to you, Del.
Thank you very much indeed, Joanna, and welcome everybody to today's session, which I'm sure will be of huge interest to most of you. So yeah, we have three speakers this afternoon. Firstly, I'm going to invite Chloe Nemo from the Committee on Climate Change to the floor. Just to try and put this whole thing in a little bit of perspective. Clearly, global climate change, greenhouse gas emissions is something that we're all very familiar with, and something that, as an industry, we're keen to play our part in reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the good of the planet. However, exactly how we fit into the overall scheme is maybe a bit less known, and hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on that today. So first up, we're going to speak, or Chloe Nemo is going to speak to us about the role that CCC can play in this jigsaw. CCC, the Committee on Climate Change, is an independent body that advises government on setting emissions targets for greenhouse gas and also reporting to Parliament, excuse me, on the progress made. So firstly, Chloe will put in perspective what the long-term strategy and long-term plans are as UK strives towards net zero. I'm then going to pass over to Mark Urbanowski from Driving the Electric Revolution. And what Mark is going to do is he's going to explain to us what funding opportunities might be available for the development of power electronics. Electrification of earth-moving machinery is one potential solution in greenhouse gases. It's certainly not the only one, but Mark is going to introduce us to certain funding opportunities that might be available for development in this field. And then Simon Buckley from Knowledge Transfer Network is going to introduce us to the work that they do, and what they do is look at what is being developed in certain areas by certain developers, third-party developers, in this highly complex network of development, and try and match people in the network in the supply chain for mutual benefit. And so that's their role, but he will describe that more fully very shortly. So firstly, I'd like to invite Chloe Nemo to the floor. Chloe, after working in the development sector, joined the Secretariat of the CCC to work as an analyst. She's responsible for the modelling of a range of sectors, including our sector, off-road mobile machinery. She also is core to the hydrogen and electricity analysis in CCC. Her analysis has informed CCC's advice to policy recommendations for meeting a net zero target by 2050 and establishing the sixth carbon budget. But Chloe will describe that all in far better detail than me. So Chloe, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Dale. As Dale was saying, my objective is really to just give an overview of how we can get to net zero, how we as a Committee on Climate Change work to keep track of progress from government to support emissions reductions in the UK. And really, my objective is also today to give you an idea of the implications of what net zero means for construction equipment, but also what our latest advice on the level of the sixth carbon budget means for construction equipment as well. So overall, I'm going to walk you through three parts in the presentation. First is just to tell you about what the CCC does and how we developed a methodology to advise on the level of the sixth carbon budget. And then I'll just outline what kinds of decarbonization options are out there across the economy, but also relevant to construction equipment specifically. And then I'll just briefly touch on policy recommendations for off-road mobile machinery. So the first thing is to know that in 2008, the Climate Change Act was passed with the objective to set legally binding targets on emissions reductions. And so that act has, well, four aspects to it. The first thing is that we need a goal, and that is the 2050 emissions target. So today, that's the net zero target that we have. Then there's a pathway. And that pathway is pretty much just intermediary targets that take the form of carbon budgets over a period of 5 years, which allow us to reduce emissions in order to meet that long-term target. Then there's a toolkit, and that's going to be the requirement that government bring forward policies to support the reduction of emissions. And lastly, there's a monitoring framework. And that's where the Climate Change Committee has a role to, first of all, monitor progress from government in achieving those targets and in bringing forward the policies. But also, in general, our role is also to advise on the level of those targets. Now, I was just mentioning the sixth carbon budget, and last December, we just put out our advice on the level of the sixth carbon budget. But there's obviously an approach that's worth understanding of how we build those scenarios and how we advise on the recommended pathway to get to net zero. And the first thing that we look at is at our UK 2050 target. And that target needs to take into account climate science and international circumstances. But the Climate Change Act also dictates that when we look at carbon budgets, we should consider wider impacts, for example, on competitiveness for the economy or other issues like fuel poverty and the like. And in order to build up that advice, we need to create bottom-up scenarios that consider the costs and the policies for all sectors, from power to waste and F-gases. So, for example, here, I just have a list of, these are all of the sectors in the economy that we cover. So we cover the entire economy, and we analyze the decarbonization potential in each of these sectors in quite a lot of detail. in order to understand, given costs and policies, the extent to which we can decarbonize those sectors. Now, for these specific, for the next 20 minutes, I'll just be focusing on fuel supply and manufacturing and construction, mainly because that's was relevant to you. But as I was saying, these bottom-up scenarios is something that we did also for the 6th carbon budget report. And if you haven't seen it, so we published the report that outlines our methodology and also just our recommendations for the 6th carbon budget. And just to give you an idea of what that includes, for the report and for the analysis, we explored 5 scenarios. The first 3 we called our exploratory scenarios. The first one is widespread engagement. So this is the light green box. And that's a world where we explore, it's a world where people and businesses are willing to choose low carbon activities, goods, and behaviors in general. Then there's the widespread innovation scenario. So here it's the light blue box. And that's a world where ultimately we see a lot of very strong cost reductions in technologies, for example, in renewables, which means that we can accelerate the pace of decarbonization across the economy. And then we have the headwind scenarios where in general, progress is just heavier going in terms of behavioral change, but also innovation. And that means that we rely more on technologies such as carbon capture and storage and hydrogen in order to decarbonize the economy. There's also our tailwind scenario, which is a pretty interesting one because we explored a world where we could push our assumptions in terms of behavioral change and innovation to see how much faster we could get to net zero. And what we found is that if in an environment that would enable really the pace of decarbonization to take up, we could reach net zero by 2042 instead of 2050. However, we can't really set the level of the carbon budget on that scenario. So instead we created this 5th one, which is the one that informed the level of the 6th carbon budget. And this scenario is informed by all other scenarios, but it's characterized by the fact that there's a lot of rapid progress in the 2020s that keep options open after 2030 to have a mix of decarbonization options across sectors. And as I was saying, because of how the Climate Change Act was developed, we also need to make sure that this pathway is consistent with climate science and international circumstances. So taking into account the Paris Agreement, but also the role, for example, that the UK is going to have this year in leading COP26. So what did we recommend? I think this is the very brief summary of the report, which is 1,000 pages, but the very brief summary is that we need to reduce emissions by 78% in 2035. And that, in the chart here, what you can see is that we have emissions, and the black line is historical emissions going down. The first carbon budgets in the light colors here are those that have already passed. And then ahead of us, we have 3 carbon budgets that have already been legislated, but that we still need to keep track of to make sure that we can continue reducing emissions in order to meet those carbon budgets. And the last one is the 6th carbon budget. So that's the purple box. And the things to notice here is, first of all, that there's a pretty significant decrease in terms of the carbon budget between the 5th and the 6th carbon budget. And that's because this is the first carbon budget that will have to be legislated in order to meet net zero. And just to put this into context, before the UK set its targets to net zero, sorry, let me rephrase. In the past, the UK had to reduce emissions by 80% based on 1990 levels in 2050, and that was changed to net zero. And essentially what we're saying with this advice on the level of the sixth carbon budget is that by 2035, we now need to reduce it by 80%, which in short means that we've brought forward the target by 15 years. And that's just giving you an idea of how ambitious now the entire economy needs to be in order to achieve net zero. Now that we've just talked about how the carbon budget was set and what the main recommendation is, I'd like to give you an idea of what we expect might happen based on our analysis across fuel supply, but also construction equipment specifically. So in order to decarbonize the economy, the first thing that we need to do is reduce our use of fossil fuels. And this here on these charts, you can see that I'm showing energy demand in gas and oil by sector to 2050. In 2020, we have a pretty heavy reliance on fossil fuels, but over time, we can see that gas use is reduced by 70% by 2050, and oil use is reduced by 85% by 2050. And it's worth noting that in 2050, the only type of gas use that we have in the economy is across power and fuel supply in order to produce hydrogen. But that's used with carbon capture and storage, which means that it doesn't need to high emissions. There's only very few residual emissions. And for oil, really oil is exclusively used in aviation. So that means that in our scenarios, we slowly decrease the amount of fossil fuels that are available in the UK in general. But as we phase out fossil fuels, we obviously need to have now low carbon sources of fuel in order to decarbonize the economy. And that's where hydrogen plays a very important role in our scenarios. So here you see hydrogen supply on the one side and hydrogen demand on the other. And on hydrogen supply, we are essentially going from having a hydrogen economy that is non-existent in 2020 to having a hydrogen economy as big as 225 terawatt hours. And that's broadly similar to the electricity system today. So it's approximately the same size as the electricity system. And that's because we have these demands from a range of sectors, and that includes shipping and power, but really the main source of demand for hydrogen is manufacturing and construction. And that's because hydrogen helps decarbonize areas that are harder to decarbonize and that just can't rely on electrification in the same way. And apart from hydrogen, there's also obviously the use of electrification in order to decarbonize the economy. And here I'm just showing demand, and what you see is that in our analysis, we found that demand would increase by 50% by 2035, but it could double, if not triple, by 2050. So going from about 300 terawatt hours to 680 terawatt hours in 2050. So we're expecting a huge increase of the electricity system as well. And that's because there's going to be electrification of different sectors. There's an increase of demand from residential buildings for heat. So that's, buildings in general, residential and non-residential, and also an increase in electrification from manufacturing and construction. And then there's also new sources of demand that come, for example, from surface transport, so just the uptake of electric vehicles, and also the use of electricity to produce hydrogen as well. And all of that takes us to pretty much doubling the size of the electricity system. Another option that's available to sectors is the use of bioenergy and waste. And I think the first thing to note here is that on this chart, I'm just showing the amount of bioenergy that's available. And the black dotted line is the amount of bioenergy. There's a cap of bioenergy that we know is available for the economy. And based on what's on that cap, we then distribute the amount of bioenergy to the sectors that need it the most, and that can make the best use of it in order to reduce emissions. And I think the two things that I want to highlight here is mainly that bioenergy use is quite consistent over the years in manufacturing and construction. So it's going to be this light blue wedge. But also in surface transport, for example, in the use of heavy good vehicles, there's going to be bioenergy that is used as a fuel, a transition fuel. So it's used in the 2020s and 2030s before being phased out by 2050. And that's because what the chart doesn't really show is that bioenergy is used towards 2050. Most biomass is used with carbon capture and storage. And that plays a crucial role in providing negative emissions in our analysis. And that's what enables us to achieve net zero. And that's why, although bioenergy represents a source of, it just represents an abatement option for different sectors, there's a limit to how much of that might be available. Then I think what might be more relevant for you, now that we've understood what might be available across the economy as options for decarbonization, then there's what might happen in construction equipment. I think the first thing is to highlight that construction equipment alone represents 6 to 7 megatons of CO2, and that is about 1% of current UK emissions. Now, I was talking before about the 80% emissions target that we had before. And in that world where our 2050 target was 80% emissions reductions, it could have been possible that construction equipment wouldn't need to decarbonize because we would have been allowed to still emit emissions in the UK. However, under a net zero target, 6 to 7 megatons is really noticeable. And that just means that the sector really has a role in helping meet net zero in 2050. Now, having said that, the chart here shows emissions over time. So in 2030, 2035, and 2050. And in yellow, orange, and green, we have the different abatement options in the balanced pathway scenario. And those are the emissions that are reduced thanks to these different options. And then the light blue wedges are the residual emissions. So by 2035, emissions are pretty much halved in the sector, thanks to the use of bioenergy that is also used as a transition fuel, just as in surface transport. But then there's also a considerable use for electrification and hydrogen. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty around the analysis of off-road mobile machinery in general. And that's why, first of all, the sector doesn't reach net zero as other sectors do. And that's because we're trying to reflect, first of all, that there might be some areas in the sector that just won't have access to infrastructure that would allow them to decarbonize. But it's also reflecting, for example, the long lives of certain machinery that might still be running in 2050. And the other thing to say is that in these scenarios, because we explored 5 scenarios, we really try to explore a range of different mixes for construction equipment. So that means that in the widespread innovation scenario, for example, we looked at electrification as a main source of abatement. And in this scenario, we also have a lot less bioenergy available to construction equipment. So this again just tries to highlight the uncertainty that there is, because our analysis in this sense is not prescriptive as to what kind of solutions and the extent to which each solution should decarbonize construction equipment. Now, it's also what I wanted to highlight that unfortunately I don't have this chart is on costs, just to give you an understanding of what will it cost to decarbonize. And unfortunately, the chart just doesn't, is not specific to construction equipment. But what I wanted to highlight here is that in manufacturing and construction, total expenditure, so if you look at the yellow line, which is just the total of both capital and operational expenditure, we can expect to see an additional investment in manufacturing and construction of up to £5 billion a year. So this is additional investments in order to decarbonize. And it's just worth noticing here that a lot of that investment is front-loaded, which means that there's a bit of investment in the 2020s, but there's a very rapid increase in investments in the 2030s that is necessary in order to reduce emissions by 2050. And that's true across the entire economy. So it's not specific to manufacturing and construction, but it just means that in the next 10 years, we need to come up with an understanding of the real solutions that are out there, start deploying supply chains, infrastructure, and the rest in order to then deploy the necessary abatement solutions for across the economy, really. So what have we said in the report on policy recommendations? And I just wanted to focus quickly on off-road mobile machinery more broadly. So this is not just relevant to construction equipment, but really one of our main messages is that policy on off-road mobile machinery has slipped through the cracks of government. And there's a lack of ownership from departments as to who is responsible for supporting the decarbonization of the sector. And this is particularly important because we recognize that this sector could have a comparative advantage for the UK in its decarbonization. And therefore, we recommended to government to include a strategy on the decarbonization of off-road mobile machinery. And so this could be in any of the strategies that they're planning on publishing this year. So there's a few of them. One of them is already gone out, the industrial decarbonization strategy. But depending on once they decide who's going to have full ownership of this sector, then they'll have to include it in one of the strategies. And specifically, we're highlighting that there is going to be a need for supporting the deployment of technologies that are already available, so electric equipment, but also supporting the development of other solutions that might not be available yet, like hydrogen or bioenergy. And then very importantly is that we're going to need to also address the challenges in terms of accessing infrastructure, which is going to be extremely relevant for construction sites as well, whether that's electricity or hydrogen on sites, but that is also something that they'll need to consider in their strategy. So this was it for me. It's worth highlighting as well that these policy recommendations that we did for the 6th carbon budget, we're going to reiterate in our next report, which is our annual PROS report that we'll publish in June of this year. So this is a message that we'll take forward. But yeah, that was it for me. Dale, over to you.
Thank you so much indeed, Chloe. A lot of information there for people to absorb. So really appreciate you sharing that with us this afternoon. Again, I would urge if people have questions to pop them in the chat. We're going to do all the presentations to start with so that we know how much time we have left for questions at the end, and we will return to them then. So please upload your questions into the chat and on any of the presentations today. So thank you, Chloe. And now we move to the driving the electric revolution aspect of today. I'd like to introduce Mark Urbanowski, who is an innovation lead for driving the electric revolution challenge. He joined DER in early 2020, bringing automotive consultancy and OEM experience. Previously, he worked on the Dyson battery electric vehicle, leading the performance and drivability attribute team. Prior to that, he was at Ricardo working with automotive companies across the globe. So Mark, over to you for an overview on driving the electric revolution challenge.
Thank you, Dale, and thank you, Chloe, as well as a great presentation highlighting some of the short-term and long-term challenges and opportunities which the construction equipment sector has got. It follows nicely into my presentation, which is sort of supporting with some of those opportunities. So first of all, I've got a bit of a summary of what driving the electric revolution is and what our focus is. So we are an industrial strategy challenge funded challenge, part of Innovate UK and UKRI, and our focus is on power electronics, electric machines and drives, and it really is the UK supply chain in PEMD, which is critical to help industry enabling the delivery of net zero by 2050. We have got £80 million of funding, and the majority of this is going on collaborative R&D projects and getting public funding into industry to accelerate PEMD supply chains and to de-risk business innovation in the area of PEMD. As well as funding, we are also really keen to support networking and collaboration. And this is connecting industry, academia, research organisations and government bodies, but also connecting people across different sectors. So we know that the automotive industry is a lot more advanced in electrification. Can we use some of that technology? Can we use those supply chains in other sectors to accelerate innovation and development towards electrification in those? Our challenge is focused on industrialization and manufacturing, not early stage research. We want to build on the good research this country does in its universities, its research organizations, to actually manufacture PEMD products here in the UK. And finally, in order for any of this to happen, we know we need to have an up-to-date workforce. We need to ensure we've got a pipeline coming through of young people getting into the industry, but also we need to upskill and reskill our existing workforce, because by 2030, it'll be the majority of the workforce will be our existing workforce. So a slide here to explain what we mean by power electronics, machines and drives, and the breadth of applications we cover. So power electronics, that's really to do with your semiconductors, silicon carbide, gallium nitride, and these are the materials that allow switching of high power voltage or current. Electric machines, probably all a bit more familiar with. This is the conversion between electrical energy and kinetic energy, or vice versa in the case of wind turbines or generators. And we've got drives, which are the intelligent control systems which embrace the power electronics, other passive components, and other ways which the system needs to work. So we're quite niche in terms of the technologies we're looking at in PEMD, but we're very broad in that the challenge is interested in all the different applications that PEMD goes into. And these are small products, they go in domestic appliances and micro-mobility, all the way up to huge maritime ship applications and wind turbines. And fitting into this area is construction equipment, which is why I'm here today. Not only are we very broad in the application, but we're also very broad in the aspects of the manufacturing supply chain that we're interested in. The PEMD supply chain isn't going to exist unless we can ensure we've got the raw materials. Can we, have we got a reliable source of the raw materials? Can we process those raw materials? And then can we make those processed materials into components, build them into sub-assemblies and assemblies, integrate them into systems? And then have we considered the circular economy? So are we reusing components? Are we maintaining components? Or can we recycle either critical rare earth elements in them to make a circular economy? So a bit of information in how the 80 million has been divided up. We've run these two competitions on the left here, the 7 million and the 5 million, and these have in 2019 and 2020, and these have funded over 40 projects with over 100 different partners, and these include projects related to the construction sector, looking at electrification supply chains. We know it's a difficult, electrification is a challenging area to get into if there isn't a big push or draw into it because of the costs involved in it, and especially if production numbers and volumes are very low, it makes it very expensive to get into. We have spent a lot of the money we've gone into has gone into setting up 4 industrialization centres. These are spread across the UK, and of that 33 million, about 30 million of it has gone into purchasing capital equipment involved in the manufacturing, testing and validation of power electronics, machines and drives, equipment that didn't exist in the UK previously, so it's filling an important gap, and equipment that is accessible to all companies wishing to use it. We have got 6 million set aside for upskilling and reskilling the workforce, ensuring we've got a good pipeline of engineers and technicians, and sort of getting into power electronics, machines and drives. A lot of that is taking people away from the carbon producing industries and retraining them to work in the electrification sector. And finally, what I want to talk to you about today mainly is our 22 million flagship competition, which is called Driving the Electric Revolution, Supply Chains for Net Zero. And this competition is open now, so we are encouraging people to form consortia and put applications into it. So a bit more information on that. This builds on a lot of the things that Chloe was saying. So the team at Driving the Electric Revolution, we're part of a large effort across many technologies and sectors to catalyse clean growth and the green industrial revolution. And we fit in with the government's 10-point plan, which they announced last year. Simon, who follows me, is also going to talk about part of the wider effort across different areas. And where this fits into is point 4, is accelerating the shift to zero emission vehicles. As I mentioned before, we've run a couple of competitions already, and we've funded 40 projects, including a few projects in this sector. And it's all with the aim of getting towards net zero by 2050. So with this competition, we have a broad focus on both niche and volume manufacturing, and I think in this sector, electrification is definitely at the niche end of manufacturing, and that is something which the UK is very good at. We're less good at the volume side of things, but niche manufacturing is something we do very well. And we have 22 million to be invested in business-led supply chain focus innovation projects. A few key bits of information we've got for the projects we are looking for. We're looking for projects to start by February 22. So there's a bit of time to set up a consortium and get applications in. They must be led by industry. It's very important. We are at Innovate UK. We are here to accelerate industry and to reduce risk for industry. We're looking for all of the projects to be collaborative. So we want 3 layers of the supply chain represented, and what that means, we'd like to see for each project a supply side and a demand side of the innovation that is taking place. And there's a few sort of key things we want each project to show. So benefit the UK PMD supply chain, ideally have cross-sector impact. It needs to be exploitable, so have a customer in mind. Have a return on our investment, so for every pound we put in, we would like to see some people, other people investing in it, and obviously work towards net zero. The sort of themes we're interested in for themes around projects, so it's looking at manufacturing process development. So this is how you make electric machines, how you make semiconductors and power electronics to go into the construction equipment sector. How products are designed for manufacture. So if you've got a prototype, a working electrification system for a vehicle, how can you improve that for manufacture? Also, how can you make the testing and validation process of manufacture more efficient? And we're also looking at circular economy. How can you reduce waste? How can you put materials components back into the supply chain? So we're looking at projects between £500,000 and £5 million, and to last 18 to 36 months. We've set the start date already. We need the projects to end by the 31st of January. If you're interested in submitting a project and you want to ask more questions, then there's an email address down here, or alternatively, I think my email address is shared as well, so please contact me directly. The competition is open. It opened on the 8th of March, a couple of weeks ago, and it is running for, I think we've got about 13 or 14 weeks left. It closes on the 30th of June. So there's plenty of time to work on your project ideas, work on your applications, and build the collaborative consortia required for the project. Yeah, so here I've got a bit of a summary slide. There's a link to the competition funding application page. As I've mentioned before, the Driving the Electric Revolution team, myself and my colleagues are here to support. Also, Simon, who's on next, works closely with us, and his colleagues Sven and Paul are also here to support with any consortia building and networking challenges which you might have. And this information on this page is I've already gone through, so I'll let you read through it in your own time, and I'll pass back to Dale, who can move on to Simon. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Hugely interesting, and yeah, just draw folks' attention to that closing date of the 30th of June for the submission of applications. Really appreciate that. Keep the questions coming, folks. Very conscious that time is racing by, so I am going to ask our final presenter, Simon Buckley, to make his presentation to us. Simon has 10 years of experience in developing electric and hybrid vehicle technology and energy storage systems within the innovation sector, and has worked on numerous APC, Innovate and H2020 programs. Simon's passionate and knowledgeable about low and zero emission transport, charging infrastructure, and connected and autonomous vehicles. Simon worked with a large range of companies, from micro companies to large corporations, across the whole mobility space and supply chain. So Simon, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale, and thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today, and for the introduction. So yeah, I cover zero emission vehicles and mobility at KTN. I've got a particular interest actually in refuse vehicles, which does have some similarity with some of the sectors and vehicle types that you cover. So before we get into a few opportunities, I wanted to go through what the KTN does. So as Mark alluded to, we can help connect you. And I think we'd all agree that as a collective, we're facing a lot of societal and environmental and economic change at the moment. And one way to combat this is innovation. And that's where we see our role. So we're creating a network of innovators across 16 different sectors, and also reaching into government, research organisations, and organisations to pool all this knowledge to help us actually drive that innovation and reach our net zero targets. So we fit within the landscape. We are the connect function, the connect arm of UKRI and Innovate UK. And I'll go through in the next slide, I'll talk about a little how that works in practice. And when I put this slide up, it's got an awful lot of text. So I just want to try and run through an example. So imagine that you are applying into the driving electric revolution competition, for instance, or you just potentially want to chat. So your interaction with me would start, you would contact me via email or via the website, or you'd contact one of my colleagues and they'd pass details on to myself. I would then organise a quick phone call with you, or probably more likely a Zoom or Teams, to go through what you're trying to do within the space, and to see how best we can potentially help you. Now, that might be, I might just say you should actually apply for these grants. You've already got the right partnerships in place. You know the market you're actually focused on. Or I might actually say, well, have you thought about this market? Have you thought about partnering with this company who's offering a revolutionary fuel cell? Have you thought about this business model? So it's not only around the grants we can help. I can also try and use my expertise within the zero emission area. So I've got 10 years experience in both the energy storage sector and electrification of large vehicles. I can also offer you some of that advice and experience. If you're then submitting the grant application, you've got your partners all lined up, then we can review that before you submit, and that increases your chance of success. So I've been teed up quite nicely by Mark and Chloe, so thank you very much for that. There are a number of different fuel options available, and we need to reach net zero, as Chloe pointed out, we have to choose one of the scenarios. So alternative fuels, we talked about that earlier, and it's got a lot of advantages. It's easy to do, but it's probably more of a transitionary fuel. Where the bulk of the future will lie is probably going to be hydrogen and batteries, and that's what I'm going to talk about a bit today. Obviously, batteries are a bit more prevalent at the moment, I would say. Certainly, you can go out and buy an electric car, so the infrastructure is starting to get there, although what it's not doing, it is a challenge for the construction industry because it's a different type of infrastructure and battery capacity and supply that you need. And there is obviously a large capital cost with batteries. Hydrogen offers a lot of benefits. It's a bit more like a conventional fuel, but it does have high capital costs and high running costs. It is also truly zero emission though. And there are a few challenges around the life cycle of, say, fuel cells. And again, you need to work out how you can get that hydrogen to site. So at the KTN, we've got this thing called the Innovation Network, and these are the current innovation networks we have. We pick an area of particular scientific interest, and I think this slide quite nicely shows the breadth and depth of what we cover at KTN. So I want to talk about hydrogen economy today and the Battery Systems Innovation Network, as both of those are directly applicable to this group. So firstly, what we're trying to do is we want to create a non-competitive advisory group so that we can take, as we mentioned, hydrogen's a busy space, and we want to look at the existing hydrogen communities around the UK and Europe and maybe broader, and look at actually how we can what the challenges are and what the solutions need to be, to make that commercially viable for a variety of end sectors, but also very much construction is definitely one of those sectors. I won't spend too much time on this because I probably won't do the slide justice because Chloe presented something very similar. But as Chloe said, hydrogen is very much going to be part of the mix for a net zero pathway by 2050. One of the reasons we decided to do an innovation network on this is because it's a challenging landscape. So I open my LinkedIn or just look at news, and you see a variety of different hydrogen announcements, or also battery electric, and it's trying to understand what those mean and how they tie together. And that's one of the reasons we decided to launch this group. We work very closely with people like Bays, who we're in regular contact with around the activities of this group and what we're doing. And I'm sure there'll be some feedback both ways regarding some of our members, what their thoughts are and what we're doing. So why be part of the network? So we want to help you understand the hydrogen landscape and gain access to the network that we have. That's more than 500 now, actually. That's almost around 1,000. And there's a variety of people there who have end users, or we might have someone who's involved in the bus sector who's actually deployed hydrogen at semi-scale. You'll also get bi-monthly newsletters and any details on funding streams, which may or may not be coming up. And there might be some interesting projects and news articles or thought pieces that we'll write on particular UK regions. We are also doing a capability map, and this is across this innovation network and the battery innovation network, which will provide a place for you to go to and find those solutions that you might want to choose to use. So we've done recently a workshop in conjunction with EPSRC and the Royce Institute, looking at the materials in hydrogen economy. It was a very interesting day. And we've also done a hydrogen blending standard webinar with the British Consulate in Vancouver. And that was to kind of see how we could potentially work with the Canadians across borders to help the green production revolution and blending of hydrogen. We've also got, and this is very interesting to you guys, and I'd love you to attend, some of the members and some of the people on this call, a workshop on the 7th of June. We haven't got a registration open yet, but I will send Dale and Joanna a link as soon as that is open. And that is very much focused on off-highway and NRMM. And I think, well, as Chloe brought up, it's a gap we've identified as well. This sector needs more support than it's currently getting. And one of the things we want to do with this workshop, and something I'm doing separately, is build this wider map of the off-highway construction, agri space, and actually present that to government and that show them what the opportunity is for this sector. And there's a lot of cross-sector stuff we can do as well. And that links back into some of the stuff Mark was saying in driving the electric revolution, taking innovation from, say, the automotive sector into this sector. And this lastly might be of interest to do with hydrogen. So, and again, we'll send this around shortly. There is a funding competition, as there was announced on the 17th of March, £3 million invested to look at a transport hub to move goods and services around in Tees Valley. And that is very much going to be focused on end use. It's obviously geographically based, but there might be some good opportunity there to actually trial some hydrogen-based solutions for movements of goods. So obviously, let me know if you've got any questions around that, but then wanted a quick little chat about the cross-sector battery network. Now, this is one of the other ISCF, it's kind of born out of one of the other ISCF challenges, the Faraday battery program. What we're trying to do here, working with UKRI and Innovate UK, what we want to do is take the technology developed in that Faraday program to develop the batteries and the battery manufacturing capability and bring that to different sectors. And those different sectors, I say maybe rail, maritime, aviation, construction, agriculture, and we're building scale here. And I think something we are very good at in the UK, the more niche vehicles, it is one of our strong points from a manufacturing point of view. and there is loads of tech that we've now developed in the battery industry, which we can transfer to this sector to help electrify what we can now. So there's a load of members who founded that, including UK BIC, which is the scale-up battery plant in the UK. And again, why you can register, if you register for this, we've got a variety of kind of open access tools that you can use. You can log on, you can look at the opportunities in your sector or the energy density that they reckon you need, and what you can already get in from certain companies in the UK. You can look a bit deeper at the chemical supply chain, or there might be something on recycling. There'll be resources. There'll also be a networking hub if you want to connect with relevant parties. So, and that's going to be live on the 24th of March. So I do invite you to sign up for that. And you'll also get the landscape map as part of that as well, which again, you can drill down into a variety of data, and including links to all these different companies. And if you want to meet them, then you can always just drop us an email and say, could I speak to AMTE Power, for instance, and we can introduce you. So if you want more info on that, I've got my emails and my two colleagues, Nicoletta and Sheena, you can pop an email to, or you're also welcome to email me. And I just wanted to highlight up that we are joining both of those networks together. So what we're doing on 7th of June, we're having this off-highway workshop, but we're running that jointly with the Hydrogen Innovation Network and the Battery Innovation Network, because we see that those two energy vectors need to work very closely in the future to fully decarbonize. You will hear sometimes people say it's one or the other. That won't be the case. It will be a true mixture between the two. And we need to collaborate from an early stage, from when you're designing vehicles, to make sure that occurs. And that's why we're doing that as a joint network rather than two separate ones. As well as the Driving the Electric Revolution Challenge, there are a few further funding opportunities that you might be interested in. There's the Innovate UK Smart Grants, there's Driving the Electric Revolution, and there's also Horizon Europe. So you can very much apply into Horizon Europe. We're now associate members, and there's a webinar, which is actually tomorrow on that, which might be of interest to you. And for larger projects above 5 million, and where you're trying to develop a zero emission vehicle, you might be eligible for APC 18. But again, you'll need to check, or you can come to me and I'll put you in contact with the right person if necessary on that. There are actually quite a few other competitions, and one of the disappointments for me personally is that construction is actually specifically excluded in some of those competitions, and I've obviously fed that back, and I think that's part of why we need to build up this capability map and this knowledge base, so that we can inform government and say, actually, look, these guys also need to be included in these funding opportunities. If you do start to apply, then we've got some generic tips on good application guides for how to apply to grants. So please click on that link, and I think there'll be a copy of these slides sent around. And you're also always welcome to email me. So thank you very much.
Simon, that was superb. Thank you so much for that. Lots of leads there, and clearly you're a man who's well connected. Lots. I think we can rely on you to make the connection with other interested parties too. So really appreciate that. And note the workshop on the 7th of June. Please forward the registration details to Joanna and I, and we'll make sure that gets disseminated to CEA members. So thank you so much for that. Joanna, I know we're now pretty much at the top of the hour. Should we take one or two questions, or do we need to wrap up now? What do you think, Joanna?
No, let's do some questions. We've got a few in the chat box, so carry on.
Okay, thank you. So thank you. Oh, sorry. Yep. Thank you. Thanks for that. So thanks, Chloe, for answering the questions that were set to you already. That's very much appreciated. Mark, is a question for you about the geographical locations of partners in the teamwork. Do they have to be UK based, or can they be European companies?
We will only give funding to UK businesses, but European or international companies can be non-grant funded partners if you have an exploitation plan that involves a European partner. Equally, if you need a particular technology or skill or expertise that isn't currently in the UK, an international company may be subcontracted as part of a consortium.
Thank you.
If you have any specific questions like this, it's quite specific. Please contact the support email address. I popped it in the chat window there, and we can deal with it on a case-by-case basis.
Perfect. Yeah, I suppose it depends very much on the specifics involved, Mark. So yeah, thank you for that. Again, actually, this one, Mark and Simon, between you, will funding only be available for electrification, or will other alternative energy sources be considered as well?
I don't mind going first on this. So we are power electronics, machines and drives focused. So it is electrification, but electrification is covered by a lot of the different fuel sources you're talking about. So you can have battery powered, even hydrogen powered vehicles would need to have a smaller battery, and then power electronics, machines and drives to get power to the wheels. We are also interested in hybrid vehicles. We know that a lot of the construction equipment can't make the leap straight from oil burning to full electric, and there's going to be a hybrid step in between. So there is power electronics, machines and drives in that as well, and that is and development needs to be done for that specific application.
Thank you.
I think if I could just add to that, just more generally, I mean, APC 18, there'll be some level of hybridization, for instance, that will be in scope, or it might be like alternative propulsion systems. So you might be able to say, for instance, hydrogen combustion or something like that. Generically, the focus on R&D is on electrification or zero emission vehicles. That's where the R&D landscape's really going.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, guys. Actually, I believe that's all of the questions answered, although let me just try. I think there's one more actually that maybe didn't get fully answered. Just give me a second. There's a new one come up, and that is, does the panel think we can bridge the big efficiency shortfall of electric and hydrogen power on units versus diesel? This is a question that's frequently in the background about in diesel we have a very fuel dense source of power. What's the situation regarding your understanding of the situation regarding electric and hydrogen power?
I don't mind going first. I'm sure Mark might have some comment on that as well. So we need to reach net zero by 2050 and before, really. Carbon emissions are the most critical fact here. I think energy density is always going to be very hard to meet with battery or hydrogen, but it's not all about energy. So it's not all about energy density. You can make sure that you've got enough energy on board to do your job with batteries and hydrogen, most certainly. And actually, from an efficiency point of view, electric drivetrains are pretty good. So I'm not sure, we would need a bit more clarification about that question, because the diesel drivetrain isn't that efficient.
Yeah, just to follow it up, there's a lot of work going on understanding duty cycles. And understanding what the best fuel source and drivetrain is for these applications. and it's not going to be a single step to electrification and hydrogen. It's going to be there needs to be a pathway mapped out from now to 2050 to get to net zero.
Okay, thank you. And actually that leads on to one question, if I may, to you, Chloe. You mentioned that non-road mobile machinery has been pretty much off the radar with regards to greenhouse gas reduction, but now is coming in. Where do you think it sits at the moment? Is it still very much on the periphery of the core focus of the legislators, or is it really now in the crosshairs and is as part of the is being looked at in more detail?
So I think the first thing to point out is that it is more on government's radar now, mainly because they have an obligation to respond to our progress report, and that's something that we've already highlighted in the past. And they'll have to respond to also our next progress report. So that's definitely something that's more on the radar. I think in general, because there's the evidence base to do this kind of analysis for decarbonization pathways is out of date. It means that we need to improve that in order to give more specific and robust recommendations as well. And that's what's going to make a difference in making government accountable for more specific recommendations rather than please look at off-road mobile machinery. So it's definitely work in progress, but it's going to require a lot of collaboration, I think, between you and us and government departments as well. And we're working to continue doing that.
Sure, and Chloe, obviously the CEA has been closely involved with you in the development as to where we are to date, and the CEA stands ready to support you in future work. That's for sure. So with that, I'd like to wrap up this session. So the Q&A session. So thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Simon, for your contributions in terms of the presentations and also your responses to the Q&A. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Joanna, I hand back to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Dale, and thanks to you for moderating it and keeping everybody on time and on message. I think that's been really good, and it's something we haven't covered before, and you'll be hearing a lot more of drive to net zero from the CEA in the coming months. Following on from this month's Power Hour, looking at next month, which is on the 21st of April, change of topic, customs duty mitigation, and this is largely looking at the supply chain and how you can save money on customs duties by reclassifying the import tariffs. The speaker is Harman Customs, who were also part of the presentation we did before Brexit on customs agency. They've actually saved some of our members significant 5-figure amounts by reclassifying some of the components that were imported. So if you're a manufacturer and you're importing any components, then I think this is an hour well worth your time on the 21st of April. I will be sending out notices in due course. So just to wrap up, thank you very much again to all our speakers. The presentations will be on our website very soon, and also the recording as soon as it's converted. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.